This story goes back to September of 1983. We decided to go on a patrol camping trip so that we'd get some prizes at the end of the year. Our scout troop, we owned a campsite up on top of a big, rocky hill. It was just our rotten luck that when we agreed to start the campout, there had been a steady rain going on all day, and it didn't look like it was going to stop for hours. But our parents were all either going away for the weekend or thought rain was no reason to cancel a camping trip. Anyway, it was just barely going to be warm enough for this to be our last chance to have a patrol campout that year. There were 4 of us, trudging up one of the thin paths of the hill, along with our limited gear under dismal green ponchos. There was me, Eric, Tony, and Sam, in that order. We were miserable and irritable, all of us except for Tony. We had reached a point where we enjoyed hurting Tony. Tony was one of those kids that got put into Boy Scouts only because they have a parent that wants free babysitting. I imagine that most of the time, his mum mostly talked to him by yelling at him, and the only way he knew how to relate to the rest of us was to annoy us. He was also the youngest guy in my patrol, and the shortest, so it was fairly easy for us to pick on him, especially when we thought he was doing his best to bring it on himself. I think Tony was delighted that the rest of the patrol was already on edge, so it would be easier for him to get a rise out of us. At that moment, he had decided to focus on Eric. Eric was a real goody-goody, most of the time. He was a pretty good athlete, and a straight-A student. I was pretty sure he'd never had a puff of anything or drank any booze or anything like that. But he loved beating on Tony, as much as the rest of us did. That seemed to be his only vice, and frankly, it kept the guy from freaking me out, being too perfect. He'd certainly looked ready to give someone a beating when I glanced back at him during that little hike. "Hey, Eric," Tony said. I glanced back over my shoulder. Tony had run up next to Eric like a puppy dog, because he knew otherwise Eric would ignore him. There was just barely enough room on the path for him to do that, if he turned himself sideways. "What?" Eric said. "I can read your mind." Sometimes, Tony would be a bit weird, or still act like a little kid when he pestered us. "Okay," Eric said. I looked forward again. "Think of a number. I can guess it." Tony was pitching his voice up. "Okay," Eric said. It's 30, Tony told him. No. You're just saying that. Really, I was right, wasn't I? Huh, it was, wasn't it? From the sound of ponchos rustling, I assumed that Tony had begun to push up against Eric. He would do that for minutes on end if you'd let him. "Get away from me," Eric said. I didn't see it, but it was obvious even before I turned around what had happened. Eric thoughtlessly pushed Tony away, just wanting the little creep off him. As narrow and slippery as the trail was, he had pushed Tony off it. Tony screamed as he went down the very steep portion of the hill, almost catching several trees before having his legs tripped out from under him by a stump. The stump was unfortunately only a little ways uphill from a large sandstone rock. Tony went into it head first, with the loud sound of a crack ringing out. I stared at him for half a minute or so, and he didn't so much as twitch from what I could see. "Oh my God," Sam said after a long silence, which seemed to snap the rest of us out of it. "Let's go help him." "Yeah," I said. Back then, this meant running down there to carry him to the nearest house, since cell phones for kids were still decades off. I tried to start down the trail, but Eric was still standing in the way. He turned to me. "We've got to tell people what happened, right?" Sam stopped and looked over at us. Eric looked down at him. "We got to tell everyone that he slipped and fell, right? We've got to help Tony," Sam shouted. "And we will," Eric said. "But first, we need to be clear. We all remember it, right? He slipped off the trail. We all saw it." "I don't know," I said. "I didn't see it happen." Eric looked at me and nodded. That seemed good enough for him. Then he looked back at Sam. "You pushed him. We have to help him," Sam said in bewilderment. Sam had never been the cleverest guy in the patrol, but I would have thought he'd have the sense to play along under the circumstances. "We will," Eric responded. "But first, I need you to tell me that you remember it correctly. He slipped, and he fell." I nodded desperately at Sam, gesturing for him to tell Eric what he needed to hear, so that we could just get down there and try to help Tony. "No," Sam said. Eric stared at him. "All right," Eric said. "Let's go." We walked quickly, not about to run for fear of slipping and falling like Tony just had. "It wouldn't have done you much good anyway," Sam said, after a little while, apparently trying to help Eric feel better. "Tony still would have told everyone you'd tried to kill him, no matter what we said." "Yeah, but that's Tony. Who'd have cared if the rest of us had our story straight?" Eric answered, his voice flat. He seemed to speed up from behind Sam. "Which way do you think would be the fastest to—" "Hey!" Eric grabbed Sam. Sam yelled as Eric dragged him to the edge of the path. "Say it," Eric said. "Say that you'll tell everyone what really happened." Eric sounded a little more scared now. He held Sam at the edge of the path, seemingly ready to let him fall. "Fuck you," Sam yelled, and he began to flail. He hurt Eric more than I would have expected, judging by how Eric grunted. Maybe it was pure adrenaline, but Sam somehow got free and began pushing him to the other side of the trail, right into a cliff. "Jesus Christ, stop fighting," I yelled at them. I may as well have been speaking Chinese. I took a few steps closer, and there was a look of murder in both their eyes, so I stepped back. Sam got his hand on Eric's chin and pushed his head into the rocks behind him as hard as he could. Eric was really trembling then. It was as if he was experiencing a panic attack in the middle of the fight. Even so, he wasn't going to just take Sam's beating. He grabbed Sam again and kind of picked him up like Sam was a tackling dummy, and then charged forward blindly. Sam's poncho was covering his face. He misjudged the distance to the edge of the path, and both Sam and he went rolling down the hill. They struck against trees with sickening noises as they fell to a level area. They were much more fortunate than Tony. I could see their movements and hear them screaming when they had stopped falling. But neither of them even tried to get up. I walked as quickly as I safely could down the trail, and then I looped back around to where Sam and Eric were. Both were yelling for my help at first, but as I proceeded down the trail, Eric abruptly went quiet. "My leg's broken," Sam told me, as soon as he saw me arrive where they'd fallen. "The bone's sticking out." It was true. His poncho had folded up, and I saw the bulge in his lower left pant leg, beneath the knee. Blood had soaked through his pants with the rainwater. "Hey," Eric said flatly. His lack of emotion made me look over at him as Sam screamed at the both of us. "I think I hurt my spine. I can't move my legs. I can't feel them." From what I could see of how his body was twisted, that was probable. I didn't know then how Eric could be so emotionless about it. But in hindsight, of course, he was in shock, if not in total psychological denial. "All right, guys, I'll go and do what I can for Tony, and then I'll get help for everyone," I said. Sam screamed at me that was the wrong thing to do, that I should leave the park and get help immediately. For all my first aid training, I didn't know if either of us were right. I thought maybe there might be something I could do with the first aid kit for Tony, whose injury had seemed the most severe. Maybe Tony had vomited and I had to clear his breathing passage. I had to check on him. I tried to assure them before leaving. Sam swore after me as I ran over to Tony, whilst Eric remained quiet. I ran over to where I'd seen Tony's head hit the rock. I had walked by it on hikes and camping trips numerous times, and I knew the rocks and trees. I had seen the rock that Tony had hit his head on numerous times, and I knew when I'd reached it. When I did, I froze for what felt like minutes. Tony was gone. There was no sign that he had ever been there, except for some blood that had pooled by the rock where he'd struck his head. It was still wet and red on the sandstone. I looked around and I called for him. I ran a short distance each way around the rock. I didn't see any sign of him. Not a footprint in the mud, nor a drop of blood. Nothing. I noticed something else as I searched though. Sounds seemed to be fading away. I could hardly hear the rain around me. I couldn't even hear my footsteps in the shallow puddles on the ground. I couldn't even hear Sam, although I had seconds before. My own voice seemed muffled to my ears. I had been afraid before, but I'd never known the sound to fade away like that. I began to feel something. Not the feeling you get when you're being watched, but the one you get when someone you truly fear is standing right over you. I turned, and there was, of course, no one there. The feeling didn't let up though. It seemed to grow stronger and stronger. There was nothing to hear, not even my own breathing, nor the beat of my heart. I ran back to where I'd left the other two scouts, as fast as I ever had run towards anything. Slowly, I could hear again that Sam was still screaming in pain and cursing out at us. Eric had barely moved his head to look at me when I arrived. Sam went quiet after I told them of Tony's disappearance. How was all Sam could think to say. I felt that sensation again, a presence all around me. It was faint, but quite noticeable. I don't know. Sam, how's your arms? Can I carry you out of here, strap style? I had 2 years and 18 inches of height on Sam, so I knew I could carry him out. Sam said I would. Whatever presence I was feeling, he seemed aware of it too, through his pain, and he didn't need to be sold on the idea of being taken out of that park. Painful it would surely be, but better than the alternative. I quickly pulled out my first aid kit, left my pack on the ground, and hastily made him a splint. He screamed as I lifted him up on my back. "Wait, what about me?" Eric asked, some emotion back in his voice now. I glanced over to him. His eyes were wide, and his skin was becoming pale. "I can only carry one person. We'll get you help as fast as we can." "But what if whatever made Tony disappear comes back?" Looking back on Eric, I find it hard to fault him now. He was just a kid. He'd made a terrible mistake, meaning only a little, if any, harm. In truth, a smaller amount of harm that we'd all inflicted on Tony time and time again. Then, he'd seen all his life, all his accomplishments, his future, all about to be destroyed over something that, really, could have happened to any of us. He had overreacted, like probably many of us would have, back when we had little life experience and the perspectives of a guy in his lower teens. But at the time, I just glared at him for a second as he lay twisted and helpless on the ground, reaching up to me. "Maybe you deserve it," I told him. I turned my back on him, and I began carrying Sam out of the park. "Hey, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt Tony. I wasn't going to drop Sam. I was bluffing. I'm sorry. I'll do anything you want. Just get me out of here. I'll give you everything. Please. Please." His voice faded quickly, and the sounds of rain and Sam's pain resumed. As I walked, the feeling of that presence faded as well. I had almost a mile to go in the rain before there would be a house with a phone. Sam was moaning and wincing practically with every step. I made slow, frustrating progress for a few hundred yards before I slipped and landed heavily on my left knee. Sam screeched in my ear after his upper chest hit my shoulder. "I think I broke a rib back there. You can't carry me like this." I didn't know how he could have a broken rib and only started to feel it now, but I wasn't about to argue. As carefully as I could in my anxiety, I placed him on the ground in a sitting position, and I switched the carrying style to firefighter so that he was now mostly over my shoulder. "Is that better?" I asked him as I had hoisted him back up. He had winced again as I held him. "It still hurts, but it's better." We rounded the curve on the trail, and we were approaching a fairly gentle slope where the parking lot was situated. I thought of it then as the end of the park. Sam had begun to feel easier to carry, so I felt then I would be able to make it out of this forest. I remember that since I'd been in the park many times before, and even with another scout on my back, being carried like this who was constantly voicing his pain, things were coming back to normal. Whatever feeling I'd experienced over where I'd thought Tony disappeared was going away. Things began to feel so normal that the idea Tony had just gotten up and walked away and emergency services would soon find him was believable. I guess what I felt then was that all I had to do was carry Sam, and then it would be up to the adults to take care of all this. Oh Jesus, Sam suddenly said quietly, "Run. Run. Run. Fucking run." Before I could ask or turn to see what I was to run from, he struck me as hard as he could on the side. He did this again and again, even after I started running. It was difficult to run even a few steps with such a heavy, awkward weight. It became easier when I noticed something that was already too familiar. Sam's voice became quieter, even as he thrashed and screeched more shrilly on my back. He might have said what it was or described anything about it, but within seconds, he was as muted as my silent steps in the puddles on the pathway. I reached the bottom of the incline. Sam was convulsing then, which I felt was a sign that whatever I was trying to flee was getting closer. He was still hitting me in the side, but it was weaker, more erratic. The path up the hill was full of loose rocks and gravel. In weather like this, it was impossible to keep a solid foothold. But by some miracle, I was able to run up it and maintain a hold on him, even as he seemed to practically be trying to break free, and I was trembling. I remember thinking that I faintly heard something then, something like a splash. That had to be a good sign. Halfway up the hill, I felt a horrible sensation in my feet. They were going numb. I remember not quite understanding why, and even with all the momentum I'd built up, my feet landed awkwardly, like I'd slipped on ice, but still landed on my feet. I barely had time to feel the pain in my ankles, because they went numb as well. I was barely able to stumble forward before the numbness climbed up to my knees. My legs were useless then. I fell forward, practically face first. Sam got free, even with his fractures, flipped over, and crawled up the hill. I tried myself. I could feel the numbness had reached my ribcage by then, but I dragged myself across the rocks. I remember perfectly the sight of Sam dragging himself too, while twitching and trembling as he crawled. A solid force hit the back of my head. It felt like a construction beam dropped from a crane. My face slammed into the ground, rocks stabbing into my cheeks hard enough to break the skin. I seemed to lose all fight and flight instinct. I just lay there, like a breathing corpse. Even if I hadn't been numb, I didn't have any energy, any hope, any understanding of what was happening to me. I didn't even have the courage to lift my hood up and see what was happening around me. I don't know how long I lay there. The numbness left me, but I still did not lift my hood. So little light was coming in under my hood. I might have fallen, and I wouldn't have been able to tell. A long time later, the rain stopped. Long after that, I began to hear again. I heard birds tweeting, cars driving by from what sounded like miles away. I didn't move. After a long time of only hearing the sounds of nature, I heard footsteps approaching me. They stopped suddenly, and then clearly changed to those of someone running up to me. "Are you all right?" An old man. He leaned over me and pulled my hood up. I looked up at him. Rocks still stabbed into my face. He winced as he saw me. "Christ, kid, what happened to you?" "I don't know," I said. I still don't know. And I still don't want to know. I know that Eric, Tony, and Sam were never found, nor was any trace of anything that may have made them disappear. Staying away from forests isn't enough for me. I have developed a need for sound. Always, after a minute without hearing anything, my anxiety creeps in. Sleeping without noise is impossible. If whatever got my fellow scouts comes for me, I need warning. That brings me to the reason I'm sharing this. Lately, even with music at full volume, and me screaming my lungs out, I've been experiencing minutes of silence. At home, at work, out driving, when I've gone on visits. I've been experiencing it. It has been many years since the end of my last camping trip, but it seems like I'm about to feel that presence again. When it wants to, I believe it will make me experience a silence that will never end.